Hello and welcome to the Joe Ligato Show. I'm your host, Dr. Joe Ligato, and today we're going to be continuing our review of the Edelman Trust Survey for 2023. And just to reiterate what we went over last time, it seems like China is a high trust society that is flexible in terms of how it goes about things so that it does not become a polarized society. And if it becomes more polarized, it has mechanisms to depolarize and de-escalate the tension within society, whereas you see countries like the United States, like South Africa, that are deeply entrenched in their beliefs and they're deeply divided. And so it's hard to change that division because there's no flexibility there. So we're going to read this article. Let me make sure you have access to. There you go. So here we see the drivers of polarization, and those drivers are distrust, weak social fabric, and unfairness. Okay, so let's see. All right, so I believe size of the impact on respondents' perceptions of polarization. Okay, so they're showing you what are the primary motivators of polarization within society. So let's take the smaller ones to begin with, because the smaller ones are things we can kind of get out of the way before we talk about the bigger issues. Economic pessimism. So just looking at this graph earlier, you see Argentina. That's probably a country that overly considers economic pessimism because of the fact that they have inflation rates in the hundreds of percentages per year. And however, most countries with inflation in the somewhere 0 to 10% range, which is like nearly every country aside from like Turkey, Argentina, and a couple of others, those countries probably do not consider economic pessimism to be a major factor in terms of polarization within their country, primarily because of the fact that there isn't as much economic pessimism, whereas in places like Argentina, like Turkey, there's a lot of reasons to be economically pessimistic. So I would like to see the breakdown by country for this type of thing, but we don't have that on hand. But just something to think about. Societal fears, I would like to see how exactly they measured that. I mean, if I had to guess, I'd probably say it is fears that your society is in decline, which would go along with distrust in media. And so I would think that societal fears and distrust in media are major indicators of polarization in particularly America, but this survey is on many countries, not just America. So I believe it's 28 different countries. And so it's interesting to see, and I'd like to see the country by country breakdown. Maybe it'll have it later in this article. So here we see the three major indicators, which we're going to tackle now. Okay, so distrust in government. I would say it's kind of interesting. In a lot of cases, government and media are roughly the same thing, where the government either directly controls media or it indirectly controls media, such as a situation in the United States where they provide things like easy access to politicians, things like that. They don't blacklist media that is favorable to them. And then over time, that media becomes more and more favorable in order to get access to exclusive information. On top of that, you have instances where the intelligence community or intelligence community assets directly buys up media in certain circumstances. So distrust in media, I mean, obviously that's a major problem. Lack of shared identity. Ooh, this is a big one because you can have an identity that is very similar to other people, but for some reason there's a wedge driven between you. And I know I harp on Yugoslavia a lot, even though it is not a country anymore, but Yugoslavia is a great indicator of that, where you had a country that if people worked together, they would be very, very, very prosperous. And all the people had a shared identity in their ethnicity because they were all considered Southern Slavs, and they were very genetically similar to each other. I mean, I believe it's like first or second cousins genetically, like all like really, really similar, first, second, third cousins. And so given that strongly shared identity, they really had one major sticking point. I know I have some people from the former Yugoslavia who watch my channel, so they'll correct me if I'm wrong here. But if I had to just say from what I understand, the major splitting point for their shared identity was religion. And so if you consider there to be a few major kind of unifying factors, things like ethnicity, religion, related to that, shared social beliefs, shared just foundational values, all of those unifying beliefs go into having a shared identity. In America, I like to say that the only shared belief people have is if they have a similar sports team in common. So do they like the Steelers? That's kind of their shared identity. That's the only shared identity they have, because people are decoupled in a lot of ways in modern Western society. And so a lack of shared identity can lead to distrust and polarization. And it's really weird because they're showing that explicitly in this survey, and common sense would have you believe that, yes, in order to create a nation state, in order to create a civilization, in order to have shared rules and values, you have to have a shared identity. Like those are essentially synonyms, really. But for some reason, the West has started to believe in multiculturalism, which is by definition a lack of shared identity. You're creating ethnic enclaves where people have things that are not in common whatsoever. They do not have shared values, and it very clearly does not lead to functional societies, which you see all across every country that took up multiculturalism. And countries that used to be assimilation-minded became multicultural instead, and it was a net negative for them. I mean, by essentially all indicators. And so it's really interesting to see, because as someone from the social and behavioral sciences, I know the people doing research on this type of thing, and they really do work the data, mess with the data as much as possible. They'll leave data out. Really, every QRP, question or research practice, they will do those things in order to massage the data to look the way they want, and the way they want is to show that multiculturalism either is working or is net neutral in some way, shape, or form. But in reality, we know on a common sense level, and all real objective data shows that a lack of shared identity is not good for a society. That's just so blatantly obvious. It's like telling people that they need to breathe. It's like, no, duh, you need to breathe to be a living human being. But for some reason, in Western civilization, which really did push modernization, they were the ones that had the scientific methods, things like that, that really pushed the world forward. Somehow we've gone to the point where we do not believe anymore that shared identity is necessary for the healthy functioning of a nation. So here we have distrust in government and lack of shared identity as the two major causes. And they only kind of go over this, but I will point this out in case you didn't notice. But they have plus signs there to show the impact of these various parts in terms of how they influence polarization. And so distrust in government and lack of shared identity had 3 pluses, so that means they are the most impactful when it comes to the drivers of polarization, whereas systemic unfairness has 2 pluses, and so it's more impactful than things like economic pessimism, societal fears, and distrust in media, but it's not as impactful as distrust in government and lack of shared identity. So systemic unfairness, what do I want to say about that? Well, we do have systemic unfairness in America, and it is not in the way that people tend to believe. And this is another one of those things, such as with multiculturalism, where it's blatantly obvious that it's not a good thing for society, but people just they do not believe their own empirical reality anymore. So in terms of systemic unfairness, if you had to be, all else being equal, a white or a black person, I'm just going to be blunt here, white or black person applying for a college or applying for a job, you would very definitively want to be the black person applying for the job, because there is what essentially amounts to racial quotas in a lot of instances, whether they will come out and say it or not. That is just overtly the case. And so when you talk about systemic unfairness, if you talk to most academics in the West, they will say it's a systemically unfair society for benefiting white people and benefiting Asians, which is just, it's just factually incorrect. Like, if you look at anything, you can, all else being equal, if you are a minority, particularly an African American, a black person, you will get far more benefits than a white person. That is, I mean, I've applied for jobs where like they've indirectly told me that because I'm white, I would not be receiving the job. I mean, it was very obvious. They couldn't put it in writing for me, but whenever possible, if we were like talking on the phone or video chatting or something, they would make it pretty explicit that that is the reason they needed more diversity. That's typically how they would word it, more diversity within their company. And so you could have everything necessary to get a job, get into an academic institution, to be a college student, and it just does not matter in the West. So there is very blatant systemic unfairness in the West. And interestingly enough, it is against the people who are still the majority population. But that is a driver of polarization, and obviously a very clear driver of polarization within the United States. So those are our major drivers of polarization. And if you are from a country other than America, just tell me how those 6 factors play into polarization within your country. Do you consider your country to be polarized? If you are an American, or even just paying attention to the American situation, would you agree with me, disagree with me on these aspects? Would you agree or disagree with this article? Just looking at this article, what I would say I disagree with here is, if societal fears is measured the way I think it is, I think it should be at least 2+ signs. And distrust in media, I really think that should be 3+ signs at the very least, because of the fact that it really is so bad. The media really does foment tension, foment hostility. I mean, you see this so blatantly. Like, they're just so anti order. They try to foment problems between people. It's a very divisionary thing. And so if you're talking polarization, I mean, media, particularly in America, has to be a big one. So something to just remember here while looking at this, though, is this is not just America. So if you're thinking that certain aspects are more impactful or less impactful than what this is showing here, then that is because this is multiple different countries. And like I said, I do have elements here I disagree with. All right, so this is specifically about the United States. So the United States case study, Republicans more likely to say our differences are insurmountable. So this is concerning, because it's one thing to have disagreements, to have differences. It's another thing to say that there's no coming back from that. That's like a step in, there's secession needs to happen. There needs to be a splitting of the nation in some way, shape, or form. And we see here, my country is polarized, our divisions are entrenched, so the problems are insurmountable. And here's the thing. If Republicans said 0% that it's polarized, 0% it's entrenched, then the Democrat number would still be egregious, because 33% means that 1 in 3 Democrats think that the differences are insurmountable, and 1 in 2 Republicans currently think that differences are insurmountable. So it should be very, very, very concerning to you, because that is the majority of the country if independents go along the same lines here, which I don't understand why they didn't measure independence as well. So, okay, so the trust in government, trust in media is extremely low. I will be better off in 5 years. Okay, that's an interesting indicator. Okay, so we're looking at, it's interesting Democrats trust government more. I'm assuming that's because this was taken when there was a Democratic president. I'm concerned that they trust media more because no one should trust media. It doesn't even matter if media is supporting what you believe. It should not be trusted. It is very clearly co-opted by the people in charge. And why wouldn't it be? Why wouldn't it be? I mean, think about this just logically for a second. If you are in power, you would want to make sure that you have control of the persuasive power of your nation. And that's why in modern times, you hear people saying go woke, go broke for media and entertainment companies, such as Disney. But the thing is, these companies lose millions, if not billions of dollars. And billionaires, oligarchs, end up buying up these companies. And you might be asking, well, why are they buying this up if it's not going to make them a profit? And the reason they buy this up is explicitly because of the fact that they want to have persuasive power. They want to control the narrative. They want to be able to persuade people. And the media is becoming less and less persuasive. But even if it's not making money, if it's persuading a few people, that is better than not persuading anyone, is how I would put it. And so just thinking about this logically, if it's possible for media and entertainment to be co-opted, which it very clearly is, then you should not be trusting media. I mean, whether it's the 25% of Republicans that are trusting media or the 63% of Democrats trusting media, you absolutely should not trust media given the way media and entertainment works, given the way it functions in modern Western society. It is a little bit interesting to see that, less than half of both Republicans and Democrats think they'll be better off in 5 years. So that, let's just get that out of the way. So that's concerning. Even if, and this is another one of those hypotheticals I like to do, even if 100% of Republicans thought they'd be better off in 5 years, the fact that less than half of Democrats think they'd be better off would still be a very concerning factor. Okay? It would still lead to a lot of polarization. But the fact that both of those are trending below 50%, and I'd probably say that the 48% is still within the margin of error for 50% probably, but it's just, those are egregious numbers. When you consider both of these things together, that our differences are insurmountable and people don't think they'll be better off, the majority of people don't think they'll be better off in 5 years, you have to be concerned. Like, you have to be concerned. These are very concerning. These are signs that, like, if you told me 10 years ago, I didn't think it would be able to get this bad in 10 years. If you had told me it would get this bad by, say, 2050, I would say, yeah, that makes sense. That's aligning with my own predictions. But given how the bread and circus show has gone on and how distracted America has been from the ailing of its society, I just didn't think people would become aware of the fact and become aware of how bad things are getting so quickly. And you see these numbers are just horrible. Okay, so next one, both cause and consequence. Polarization itself leads to further distrust. Okay. I think I'm going to take this one on the next video. We are going over time. I spend a lot of time talking about these graphs. We've only gone over like 3 graphs, and I'm already over 15 minutes into this. So thank you for sticking with me. We will have a part 3 to this. I'm going through this slowly, but again, this is very important information. If I had to say 2 things that are important for a functioning society, I would say those 2 things are trust and cooperation. And we're seeing the complete deterioration of trust and cooperation in a lot of countries across the world, and especially Western society. So stick with me for part 3 that we'll be coming out with very soon after this video. It'll probably come out the day after this video is posted. So thanks for watching. Please give us a thumbs up. It helps us in the algorithm. Please subscribe to our video. And give us comments in the comments box. I get notifications directly to my phone. I usually read it and, if necessary, respond immediately. So Thanks, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. Bye.